We begin our show this morning in Ukraine, where there are renewed efforts to evacuate civilians trapped in the besieged southeastern city of Mariupol.
Ukraine's deputy prime minister says the government is sending 45 buses to get people out and deliver humanitarian aid. That evacuation attempt now appears more urgent than ever, with Russia said to be building up its troops in the east. Last night, President Zelensky warned that part of the country could face a wave of new attacks as Russian forces refocus on the Donbas region. It all comes after the head of Britain's cybersecurity agency claimed that President Putin's advisors were, quote, afraid to tell him the truth about what's happening on the ground. It's a sentiment that was shared by the White House yesterday.
We have information that Putin felt misled by the Russian military, which has resulted in persistent tension between Putin and his military leadership. We believe that Putin is being misinformed by his advisors about how badly the Russian military is performing and how the Russian economy is being crippled by sanctions because his senior advisors are too afraid to tell him the truth.
We've got a team standing by to cover all this and more. We'll get to former special assistant to the president, Colonel Chris Costa, and our White House correspondent, Mike Memoli, in a moment. Before that, though, let's head to NBC News foreign correspondent Molly Hunter. She's in Lviv for us this morning. So, Molly, it's a new day in Ukraine, a new attempt to get civilians out of disaster-hit Mariupol. Any indication that this latest round of evacuations will be more successful than what we've seen so far?
Joe, good morning. All we know is that there are 45 buses standing by, as you said, and getting out of Mariupol is not kind of as simple as some of the other cities. In order to get out and to even reach those buses, people need to get into private vehicles, go through more than a dozen checkpoints to get out to the outskirts of Mariupol, and that is where those buses will pick up. Now, we have asked the Ukrainians again for an update on this and the ICRC whether or not they think it might actually work today. We haven't yet heard back. We're also watching convoys to get humanitarian aid into Melitopol. We have not heard if that's successful. And then the other humanitarian corridor that we've been watching all morning, Joe and Savannah, is in Kharkiv, where our Richard Engel is. And we have heard news this morning that that humanitarian corridor has already failed.
All right, that's hard to hear, Molly. Now, President Zelensky is warning the eastern Donbas region could face a new wave of attacks, that Russia is building up troops there. Moscow said earlier this week it was focusing on, quote, liberating that region, which includes those two self-declared breakaway republics. We know Ukraine has been pretty successful at pushing back Russians in and around Kyiv, but how are they faring out in the east?
That's exactly right. So I think really part of the narrative that we have to take into account as we talk about Russian troops withdrawing is that, yes, Russian troops are pushing back, are withdrawing, are going to resupply. And that is partly because they are being pulled back. That is also partly because Ukrainian troops are actually actively pushing them back, specifically around the capital. Now, I was just in Odessa, Joe, and we've been talking to people there about whether or not they think that troops will show up on that southwest doorstep. And they fully believe that this kind of talk of a ceasefire, this withdrawal, this pause momentarily is just an option, is just an opportunity, I should say, for Russia to reorganize, resupply, and then really kick into that second wave of attack that we've heard Washington officials also warning about.
We appreciated all your great reporting from Odessa. Molly, while we have you, I want to ask, all this is coming after Russia said it was scaling back its military activities in and around Kyiv. Is that actually what's happening on the ground?
Absolutely not. And I think the headline here in the last two questions as well, as we talk about the situation on the ground, is that no one, not in Chernihiv, not in Kyiv, not in Odessa, is taking President Putin at his word. So we have seen a stepped-up attacks around Chernihiv and Kyiv, constant bombardments, according to reports from there. We have also seen President Putin not focus just on the Donbass, just on the east. We saw strikes in Mykolaiv in the last 2 days. That's in the center of the coast. And right now, this morning, there is an air raid siren in Odessa, which is just where we were. I think that city really bracing for impact, and whether or not President Putin actually shows up on their doorstep is really going to depend on what happens in Mariupol, Joe.
So much to keep an eye on, Molly. Thank you so much.
Let's bring in NBC News White House correspondent Mike Memoli. Mike, good morning. Good to have you with us. So in a phone call yesterday, Wednesday, President Biden told Ukrainian President Zelensky that the U.S. will send an additional $500 million in aid. What do we know about that money? And then tell us what else happened from that phone call.
Yes, Savannah, this was a 55-minute phone call. We know from a tweet from President Zelensky that he offered President Biden directly an update on the status of the fight on the battlefield, but also the negotiations that are underway in Turkey, an important opportunity for the president to get a firsthand account of where those talks stand. And of course, we also know that President Zelensky is asking for more financial assistance and more military aid. Now, the White House, for its part, saying that the U.S. continues to give both sufficient and really significant military assistance in the form of anti-tank, anti-aircraft missile that they really think have been playing a big role in Ukraine's success on the battlefield. Also saying that this is the most significant effort on the part of any country in the world to provide this kind of assistance to Ukraine. Now, that $500 million is interesting. This is what they're calling direct budgetary aid. We know that Ukraine's economy has really cratered under this invasion from Russia, and they need help, frankly, just paying their bills. So this is another example of what the U.S. is doing. This is the 10th phone call between President Biden and President Zelensky just this calendar year, another sign of the close coordination these two sides have.
Yeah, absolutely. And Mike, I want to ask you about something here at home. NBC News has learned that President Biden is said to be weighing a plan to release 1 million barrels of oil from this strategic petroleum reserve that we have for 6 months to help counter these astronomical gas prices that we're seeing because of the war in Ukraine. What can you tell us about this plan?
Yeah, this is where this global crisis intersects with our domestic politics here. Obviously, President Biden facing significant pressure to do more to lower the price of gas. The price of gas, according to AAA, up $1.35 from this point last year. And what the White House is considering here, releasing 1 million barrels a day over 180 days, would more than double what the president has already done in terms of the strategic petroleum reserve. He announced the U.S. was releasing 50 million barrels in November, another 30 million just in time for that State of the Union address at the beginning of the month. We're going to hear more from the president today at 1:30 when he speaks about what they've been calling Putin's gas price hike. Of course, the effort to shift the blame here, but also to speak frankly about what is driving the cost. We've already seen since the announcement or since the word potential of this announcement that global oil markets have suffered a little bit, down between 4% and 6%.
Mike, I now want to ask you, before I let you go, about something Joe was just talking about a second ago. That's according to a U.S. official. Intelligence shows that Putin's senior advisors are too afraid to tell him the truth about the war in Ukraine, how Russia's performing, and essentially lying about it. What's the White House saying about that?
Yeah, this is a significant tactic that we've seen the U.S. use over the course of this conflict. First, they were releasing intelligence, declassifying information about what they expected Russia to do on the battlefield. Most of that intel proved to be dead on accurate with what Russia did next. Now they're releasing this intel about what Putin isn't being told by his generals. The White House saying that there's evidence of significant tension between Putin and his generals because of the lack of information they're providing to him. It was interesting to hear Secretary of State Tony Blinken put this in familiar terms for how President Biden sees this. Let's take a listen.
One of the Achilles heels of autocracies is that you don't have people in those systems who speak truth to power or who have the ability to speak truth to power. And I think that is something that we're seeing in Russia.
Now, this is not just the U.S. that's declassifying this kind of intelligence. We heard from a top British intelligence official who says that they're seeing low morale on the part of Russian troops, that they're refusing orders on the battlefield, and also that they've mistakenly shot down some of their own aircraft. So this is obviously an important tactic. But it was also notable what John Kirby, the Pentagon spokesperson, said yesterday, that this is concerning that this kind of breakdown is happening in communication, and it might lead to a different form of escalation from Putin as he learns more about what he's being not told from his generals.
Right. All right. Mike Memoli, thank you so much.
Let's bring in Colonel Chris Costa. He's the former special assistant to the president and senior director for counterterrorism on the National Security Council. Good to have you with us, Colonel. Let's pick it up right there with what Savannah and Mike were just talking about, that recently declassified information which says that Putin is being misled by his inner circle. What do you make of that, and how does that impact the war?
Well, first, we shouldn't be surprised about that. First of all, it's the idea that Secretary of State Blinken just talked about, the idea of truth to power. Of course, in an autocracy, the principals, the advisors are very scared to give Putin the bad news of a poorly executed executed campaign, a poorly executed military campaign with significant casualties. So Putin isn't getting all of that feedback from the seniors that are going in to brief him on it. So I think it's well advised to continue, the West to continue to share some of that intelligence, to declassify it and get the word out. Moreover, I think people like Macron from France, when they're talking to Putin, they should convey to Putin that it's a campaign that is hopeless, and they should try to provide some of that information to him themselves. He needs to continue to hear it from different channels, because clearly he is not hearing it from his senior advisors.
Yeah, that might be one of the only ways he gets that kind of information. I want to ask you about a number from NATO. It says up to 40,000 Russian troops have either been killed, injured, captured, or gone missing. That's a big number, and that's just during the first month of the war. So do you think, is there a point for Putin when the losses are so great, he realizes the war is no longer sustainable?
I think possibly if there's internal stress, it's the moms, the mothers of those conscripts. I haven't heard a lot of people talking about the fact that it's the Lenten season. Orthodox Easter is coming, and this is powerful to the people of Russia, to the families of the conscripts, and this news needs to get out, because the Russian people, the mothers of those conscripts, are going to be terribly distressed. Those numbers sound inflated, but I have no way of corroborating or validating them. But clearly, there is a great deal of Russian casualties on the battlefield, as reported by the Ukrainians themselves in other sources.
Moms always have a powerful voice. Now, I want to ask you, during an address to the Australian Parliament, Ukrainian President Zelensky, he specifically warned about concern over the possible Russian use of nuclear weapons. How concerned should we be about that becoming a reality?
Well, we should always be concerned about the use of nuclear weapons. But at the same time, as horrific as it is, I'm not dramatically surprised. Throughout the Cold War, if there was a war in Europe, as an intelligence officer, we expected nuclear weapons, tactical nuclear weapons, to be used on the battlefield, as well as chemical weapons. So this is something I take in stride, and I take it in stride because we expected it. As I said, it is horrific, and it will be a game changer, since we haven't seen tactical nuclear weapons used for over 70 years. So it will be a game changer globally. But at the same time, we have to prepare for that possible outcome.
Colonel Costa, good to have you with us this morning. Thank you so much. To the weather now. The cleanup is underway after a suspected tornado touchdown in Springdale on Wednesday. Several people were seriously injured as this strong storm ripped roofs off of homes and scattered debris across the town. That same system now making its way through Georgia and the Florida Panhandle.
Bill Cairns is with us with the latest on that storm and the rest of the weather across the country. Hey, Bill, good morning.
Well, good morning. There's some good news and some bad news. We've had a lot of damage. That's the bad news. The good news is we don't have any confirmed fatalities from this severe weather outbreak. And going into it, it looked like a very scary scenario starting yesterday. We have had reports of 24 tornadoes. So that does qualify as a tornado outbreak. Usually anything more than like 8 to 12 is considered an outbreak. And all the blue dots are high wind reports. So a lot of wind damage, even outside of those tornadoes, from Texas all the way through Mississippi and now heading through the Florida Panhandle. We've got about roughly 250,000 people without power from this severe outbreak. And one of those storms, I believe we had a video for you from Big Branch, Louisiana. That was one of the ones overnight that we had some pictures come in from of suspected tornado damage. And as the sun comes up and the survey crews get out there, we'll have better information about these storms and, you know, if they were tornadoes or not. But there's the video, though, from Big Branch, Louisiana. The one that we showed you earlier from Arkansas, by the way, was an EF3 with 145-mile-per-hour winds. And we'll wait and see what other scenarios, what other surveys show you. as the day goes on today. So what's left of it? We do still have some very strong storms near Panama City, Florida, with one tornado warning. This tornado watch goes until 2 p.m. And as far as today goes, it's not as dangerous. The atmosphere is not quite as much energy as yesterday, but we still have 57 million people included in the slight risk from New York City to southern portions of the Catskills, all the way down the East Coast to northern Florida. And the severe weather mode is going to be a little different. In the south, we're more concerned with isolated tornadoes and wind damage. This is what it's going to look like at 1 p.m. with the storms approaching Jacksonville, Savannah, Charleston, and Myrtle Beach. It looks like about mid-afternoon for the I-95 corridor there. And as far as the big cities go, up around Richmond, D.C., Philly, and New York, the biggest risk will be right around 4 to, it looks like, around 6 p.m., maybe 7 p.m. around New York City. So for the evening commute, a line of strong storms, gusty winds, possible small hail will go through, maybe an isolated tornado, but that tornado threat is fairly low. So by the time we get to about 8 to 9 p.m., it's just about over with everywhere, just a little bit of leftover rain from New York heading to Boston. So for today's forecast, as advertised, the severe weather is shifting to the East Coast. The cleanup begins in the Deep South. 75 and sunny today in New Orleans, a little breezy, but not bad weather for all the recovery efforts to get power back on for people. And we have had injuries. We don't want to be insensitive to those people that have to go through that. But the fact that we had a moderate risk of severe weather, 24 tornadoes and no fatalities, we did well.
Yeah,
absolutely.
We'll take that. All right. Thank you, Bill.
A little bit of good news. Thank you. Now, the committee investigating last January's attack on Capitol Hill is set to question Jared Kushner today. Kushner agreed to speak to the committee voluntarily, and he now becomes the most senior member of Donald Trump's White House to testify in the investigation. NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Ali Vitale joins us now for more on this. Ali, good morning. So, I mean, this feels pretty significant as we've seen so many people not cooperate, call on executive privilege, that his son-in-law will be testifying. Put that significance in context and then tell me what the committee is trying to find out specifically from Jared Kushner's testimony today.
Well, look, Savannah, from an optics perspective, this is a really big deal because Kushner was not only a longtime top aide in the White House, but he is, of course, also family to the former president. So optically, for the January 6th committee, it does look like the president's son-in-law coming forward voluntarily to talk to them and participate in this interview. That's significant. On the other hand, though, Jared Kushner wasn't in Washington when this was happening on January 6th. He had been overseas in Saudi Arabia, part of his foreign policy portfolio. So in terms of what tangible information he might have in terms of the behind the scenes of what was happening in the White House, it's a little unclear at this point what he could offer the committee. The interesting piece of this, though, is in getting a sense of those Ginny Thomas texts with Mark Meadows, we know from those text messages that she was sending Jared Kushner information about Sidney Powell and other of those fringe conservative lawyers, their legal theories about ways to overturn the election. That could be one of the ways that Jared Kushner could be helpful to the committee here. We know that they're investigating a wide range of things, both including what the former president was doing in those critical hours, but also the ways in which these opposition efforts and efforts to potentially overthrow the election results were coming together. So all of it's part and parcel. It's interesting to see what he might be able to tell them.
Absolutely. And to your point, interesting that a family member will be right there on the stand. Ali, now the Biden White House has weighed in again on the role executive privilege should play in the investigation. Let's first listen to what Communications Director Kate Bedingfield told reporters yesterday.
He's been quite clear that they posed a unique threat to our democracy and that the constitutional protections of executive privilege should not be used to shield from Congress or the public information about an attack on the Constitution itself. And so as a result, the White House has decided not to assert executive privilege over the testimony of Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump.
So what do you make of this stance by President Biden? And also that last little bit there, does this open the door at all for Ivanka Trump to be speaking with the committee next?
Yeah, well, first, what the White House is saying there tracks with everything that they've been saying all along. At each turn of this, when high-profile individuals in the Trump orbit have said they want to cite executive privilege for why they can't cooperate with the committee, the Biden White House and the White House counsel's office have been there with letters saying that they're not asserting executive privilege in this, and they are the White House that would assert executive privilege here. So that's one of the key pieces, and it does officially clear the way for these former White House officials to speak with the January 6th committee. It's kind of a formality, and it's not entirely unexpected. This is the way the Biden White House has been handling these sorts of inquiries. On the Ivanka Trump piece of this, It was months ago now that her voluntary request to appear went out. It was lengthy. You remember there were multiple prongs and things outlined that the committee wanted to talk to her about, including conversations that she might have had with then Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, potentially even Mike Pence, certainly with her father, the president. All of that is important to the committee. At this point, though, it's sort of a tea leaf reading, and we'll have to see what comes out of today's meeting on whether or not Jared is some kind of a precursor or potentially something else to getting Ivanka Trump with the committee as well.
So, Allie, we have Kushner's testimony today. Then we also just had this new information this week about those missing phone logs, those 7 hours of when the insurrection was actually happening. You brought up just a moment ago Ginny Thomas's text to Mark Meadows. You know, I think it's important to keep in context here. This is something we've been talking about a lot. It feels like it's been going on for a long time. It's had these starts and stops as people cooperate or not cooperate. But this is an investigation looking for answers. Do all these developments put the committee any closer to finishing this? Or does this ultimately just raise more questions, more people that would need to be talked to? Where are we at with this?
Yeah, you know what? It's so funny that you say this because this is the question I've been asking myself and, frankly, members of the committee all week. At what point, and as journalists, I think we also get this, right? When you're attacking a story and you're asking questions and it leads you to more people, at what point do you put the pen down? And that's the question that this committee has been grappling with over the course of the last few months. You'll remember when we were at the end of the calendar year last year, the big conversation was around this will be the phase of public hearings in 2022. They'll start in February. We'll start building a narrative. That's what the committee's goal was. That has been pushed back. We're at the end of March now. Chairman Thompson has said he wants to finish the deposition phase of this by the end of this month, and that would put hearings, public hearings, in May. He reiterated that to me yesterday as he was leaving votes, but at the same time, we've seen that sliding, and there has been just so much information that comes out. You sort of have to wonder if they're not going to be able to just push ahead with public hearings while also still fact gathering, but that's kind of still up in the air.
Allie Vitale, important context there. Thank you so much. Good to see you.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.